I wrote a lot of stuff on my way down here. Using technology is difficult in that other state because it's a quantum state in the brain, and technology is based on some quantum physics. So when the brain goes into a quantum state, it's almost canceling out some of the resonances of technology, and it can be difficult. It's almost a state where the brain becomes more powerful than technology, because the brain creates technology, so the brain has to be more powerful than the technology it creates in some way, because all of this reality is contained within our brain as being able to perceive it in some way. And I was thinking that our brains are amplifiers. They can amplify love, they can amplify hate, they can amplify whatever it is that they're projecting, or in a way they're amplifying whatever it is that we actually sense. If we have a clear mind, we're amplifying that. And the thing is that when we have a clear mind, we don't have the ego interpreting. Our senses perceive choicelessly, which means we don't personally choose what we sense. And so then we sense what the body is designed to sense physiologically and neurologically. And so we're amplifying that which we're neurologically designed to sense without the conditioning imposed on the neurology through the ego, mind, voice, sound complex. And we're perceiving that holistically with our senses, and then we give voice to something related to that in the moment. So thought is a desensitizer of the brain. It's the resonance of sound getting in the way of the perception of the neurology. And so since there's so many insensitive brains on the planet, it makes sense that some have to pop into map consciousness and trans consciousness, temporary high sensitivity, in order to act differently, in order to, in a way, balance Gaia. And it's what Gaia is doing. We have these insensitivities due to thought, but those are just thoughts. They're very weak. And so the universe and Gaia can wipe those away temporarily, obviously. It's not just us and our ego who can wipe it away. We actually can't wipe it away with our own ego, because it's the ego trying to wipe away the ego. So instead of celebrating people who have this thing happen that gets rid of all this extra garbage, and there's a bit of a process to it, and it can be really scary, people are just medicated back into the insensitivity. And the reason it's so hard to recover is that that's not natural. Our brains are designed to be sensitive. And once we've been sensitized, we have to take some kind of drug to desensitize us forever. Why aren't we learning to live with and be with and act as that sensitivity instead of acting as the ego? But we get desensitized, and then the drugs are like, well, this means you can try to get some kind of 5-hour-a-week job for the rest of your life and be happy. I feel like we need an internal earthquake preparedness kit. And not because the earthquake is that bad, it's the aftershocks of the people that try to help us sometimes. And I was reading the book On Dialogue on the way down here, and Dr. David Bohm talked about an energy without reason that just goes on by itself. And it reminded me of map consciousness and mania and creativity. And I'm wondering, what are those states of consciousness that go on by themselves? And they talk about flow. And these states mess with our assumptions because there's nobody there to make assumptions when we're flowing like that. And the coolest thing was that I was reading it, and on page 34 and 35 in the Kindle version, it said there are situations where people have differing assumptions and opinions, where one faction is interested and the other isn't. Still, somehow, we have to have a dialogue. even if one faction won't, or you may by yourself. And I thought it was interesting that this was a few pages after the page I left off in reading it a year ago. And so I was reading, and basically in the book he's saying, have a dialogue with yourself if you can't have one with anybody else. And I found that fascinating because that's what I've been doing for months and months. And maybe I'll somehow spread the attitude of self-dialogue, because to me it initiates learning, it initiates wonder, it initiates curiosity, it initiates not knowing. All of these approaches with the mind and the brain that release us from identifying so much with what we know and what we're projecting onto reality. And he said in the book that dialogue isn't concerned with truth, although it may arrive at it. It's concerned with meaning. And I talked about meaning more in my earlier videos, I think, and how map consciousness and trance consciousness is a meaning-making process. And in a way, it's sort of a self-dialogue state, in dialogue with Gaia and the universe, and making meaning out of life, moment to moment. And again, it's the initiation of a hyper-learning state of the brain, and learning is a lot about making meaning, not necessarily making facts and truths. And he even said in the book, the senses provide you with information, but you have to be sensitive or you won't see it. And I feel like all this meaning and word images are coming so strongly because the mind screen is finally clear. But it's definitely mixed with old meanings from the past as well, at least initially. So the senses are blocked, and I wrote down it's sort of like a backup camera with snow on it. If there's snow over the camera, it's useless. Right now we have sound and image snow over our senses because it's in our neurology. Map consciousness wants to have dialogue. It wants to make meaning out of its perceptions because it's actually perceiving for the first time in a very long time. And it feels so meaningful. But again, once one has pruned some of these perceptions and settled into this state, it doesn't feel as meaningful. One can see meaning everywhere, so it is meaningful, but it doesn't feel ecstatically meaningful. Because there's just as much meaning in taking out the trash as there is in seeing a beautiful sunset. Because the thing with meaning making is that the meaning is a certain richness, and it's not about measuring, it's not about good, bad, or this is more meaningful. Because when the brain starts doing that, it's back in the domain of ego and pleasure. And meaning is rich, but it's not pleasurable. It has a richness to it that allows the brain to decouple from those pleasure complexes. The learning and the understanding and the energy one is acquainted with by having that type of brain state. When we again become sensitive, we're trying to figure out what our perceptions mean, and it's not again figuring out in terms of right and wrong. If it feels meaningful, then it's meaningful, not about right and wrong, but we're so conditioned to right and wrong and absorbing whether something is right or wrong, and that's comparing it to the past information as opposed to seeing the meaning right now, which can't be wrong because it's right now. So maybe it's a question of right now and wrong. If it's right now, it can't be wrong. I'm wondering if there could be this map dialogue process initiated, map as in meaning, action, possibility. If we're making meaning and acting based on meanings, then we step into our possibility. But if we're acting based on the ego, it's not going to be on a possibility because it's already old and conditioned. Maybe the meaning of life is to make new meaning each moment, not to find this ultimate meaning of life, just to be able to see meaning each moment and feel that meaning, not just have an intellectual thought about it. That's not meaningful at all. It seems like through self-dialogue, I've applied dialogue to the problem of having a diagnosed mental illness in the mental health system. And there's a page 46, and it's titled Beyond Dialogue, and I didn't write down what it says, but maybe I'll try to read it at some point. It's on my phone, so I can't read it at the same time as doing this video. Hopefully I'll find somewhere where I can talk that I don't have to whisper. And he also said, do you see the necessity of this process? And if you do, you have to do something. And I have been doing something. I've been just doing this process by talking to myself. Sometimes I look at all these pages when I've accumulated pages and have to catch up. But then I get to this point of seeing something that I wrote down that I remember the feeling of it being very profound, what Dr. David Bohm said. And he talked about tacit knowledge, which is understood or implied without being stated. And he gave this example of if you are about to fall off your bicycle, apparently we make corrections based on a scientific formula. Scientists have worked out a formula of how we'll make the corrections so we don't fall off the bike. But we don't need the formula in order to not fall off the bike. We won't actually be working out the formula in order to not fall off the bike. And I wrote down that maybe map consciousness and trans consciousness is this type of formula. It's this type of correction. We're in our life in this linear process, and all of a sudden we almost fall off our life. We fall off the bicycle of our life. And I feel like it's a course correction of the collective consciousness through certain gestures. So we're thrown off our linear, normal gestures, and then say we go into something like mania, course correction, doing different gestures, and then we sort of, according to the formula, have to course correct back to our ego consciousness. But to me, it's almost like some people have to sort of fall off the bicycle of their life or wobble on it in order to correct the collective wobble in the other way that is happening through the collective of humanity. And we can't understand what this formula is, though it might be able to be measured, but it's immeasurable. I feel like maybe mania and map consciousness and trans consciousness are an act of an immeasurable formula. It's an act of infinity. It's an act of the universe through us. The universe comes and pushes us off our bicycle of life. But it's actually to help others not fall off their bicycle. It's an infinite and undefined gesture of the quantum field. It's a quantum takeover. It's to compensate for the thoughts, the collective vibrations of others and ourselves. It feels like I've finally got out of this paradigm of mental illness and the dogma of that to one of dialogue and perception and meaning making. So it's like consciousness has transcended the limits that were imposed upon it and the paradigm that it was told to operate within. And I go back to what I said about how it's not just a meaningless mental illness. I really feel that what a lot of us go through is described in spiritual texts and things. And it seems that consciousness is more powerful than the body. If consciousness can epigesture the body, when it's in the manic state, which is act through the body without the ego's ability to stop it from doing so. And maybe it's the ego coming in and attempting to stop it from doing so that makes it so chaotic at some time. It's partly because we fear this discontinuity, this quantum forgetfulness, this paradox of being oneself yet forgetting oneself. I feel it takes surrender and wonder and willingness to forget everything one knows so that something else might come into play. And it really is playing with meaning. Again, the perception in the moment is a play. It's a play of light, and the light hits our mind screen and creates this orchestra of sound and sensation. And when we're in touch with our holistic perception, it's sensation all. It's all sensation, and it's sensational.